What has turned out to be a very busy Friday night. Comedic genius Sarah Silverman will be joining us exclusively tonight for the interview. I'm very much looking forward to that. Also, New York police trying a new tactic today to clear out Occupy Wall Street protesters, despite some new proof about just how effective the 99 percenters have already been. We have a special old-school Friday night, kind of weepy in a good way cocktail moment coming up at the end of the show. That is all ahead this hour. But we begin tonight in the great state of New Hampshire, where from the looks of things, Herman Cain is going to have to do more than make a video of his chief of staff on his smoke break saying Herman Cain is awesome. Mitt Romney is up by 27 points in New Hampshire. Herman Cain is in second place, but he's way down there, down in the teens, along with Ron Paul. Ron Paul at 12% in New Hampshire, which is pretty okay for Ron Paul. It's pretty good for a guy who nobody really thinks has a shot at winning the nomination, but who is mostly in the race to stir stuff up and get people interested in whether or not the Wizard of Oz really might have been an allegory for the gold standard, right? But this time, 4 years ago, it seemed like if Ron Paul ran again in 2012, he might be doing way better in New Hampshire than he's actually turned out to be doing. And the reason it seemed a while ago like Ron Paul might have a real shot in New Hampshire is because of the now sort of forgotten plan to move all of the nation's libertarians to New Hampshire. Do you remember that plan? The plan is still out there, the Free State Project. They say they are still trying to recruit 20,000 liberty-loving people to move to New Hampshire, to become a critical mass in New Hampshire and thus influence the state's politics. But with Ron Paul at 12% in the polls in 2012 now, it looks like the libertarians have not had enough success yet to try to make Ron Paul's New Hampshire dreams come true. But you know, the Free State movement thing, the Free State Move the Libertarians to New Hampshire movement, is not the only slightly kooky Move the Conservatives movement in America. There's another migration movement, not for libertarian conservatives, but for theocratic ones. It's called Christian Exodus. Their plan was to get thousands of fundamentalist Christians to move, all of them, to move together to South Carolina. Then once they had a critical mass of fundamentalists in South Carolina, they would secede from the United States. They would, quote, form an independent Christian nation that will survive after the decline and fall of the financially and morally bankrupt American empire. As the website Right Wing Watch has noted, a blogger for the Christian Exodus secession movement, a guy named Les Riley. Here's a screen cap of his bio from the secessionist site. Les Riley is also the chair of the Mississippi Constitution Party, which says it wants to restore American jurisprudence to its biblical foundations. That same guy, the head of the Constitution Party in Mississippi, who blogged for the secessionists to South Carolina thing, he also founded something called Personhood Mississippi. He is behind the Mississippi Personhood Amendment. He crafted the language of this constitutional amendment there, creating a new definition of person in Mississippi, personhood beginning at the moment of fertilization. He started the signature drive that got the question on the ballot, and he is the guy who was behind the statewide promotion for the Personhood Amendment, a statewide promotion called the Conceived in Rape Tour, as in women who become pregnant through rape should not be allowed to get abortions. So that's how the Personhood Amendment came to be in Mississippi. That's where it came from. That's how it got moving. But then out of that fringe, it ended up moving sort of to the center, at least to the center of Republican politics. It got taken over by people who can really take this thing places. The American Family Association, also based in Mississippi, has put all of its weight behind passing this thing. And the American Family Association is super fringy, but it is also a big deal now in Republican politics. It's a major sponsor of the Values Voters Summit, where every candidate for president except for John Huntsman showed up this year. They also organized that big prayer rally in Texas with Rick Perry this summer. So the Personhood Amendment in Mississippi has gone from the wingnut secessionist thing to being something that has a lot of conservative organizational weight behind it. It also has conservative personality behind it. Mike Huckabee decided to be a celebrity endorser for the Mississippi Personhood Amendment, and he can use his Fox TV show to advocate for it, which is where he got supposedly not that socially conservative, not that wingnutty Mitt Romney to endorse this thing.
Would you have support of the constitutional amendment that would have established the definition of life at conception?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Now, that has a whole bunch of potential consequences. If a fertilized egg is a person legally, anything that stops a fertilized egg from eventually becoming a live birth becomes a crime, potentially becomes murder. So if you have a miscarriage, that could be grounds for a criminal investigation into manslaughter or murder. It could make fertility treatment illegal. Same goes for many common forms of birth control. Any form of hormonal birth control, like the hormonal birth control used sometimes in the IUD or the birth control pill, certainly the morning after pill, they could potentially be made illegal by this thing. Not to mention, of course, banning all abortion, no exceptions, full stop. We have tried to ask Mitt Romney's campaign if that's really what Governor Romney meant when he went on Mike Huckabee's show and said he absolutely supported this. We want to find out if he really meant that and he wants to ban birth control or if he was somehow tricked into answering that way. But so far, Mitt Romney's campaign has not gotten back to us on this despite repeated questions. But that's where the ban abortion and birth control and fertility treatment campaign stands in Mississippi right now. On the one side, it emerged from the fringe, but you now have this juggernaut of a campaign to control every pregnancy in the state of Mississippi. And yes, it does start with a crazy fundamentalist secessionist guy, but then it goes mainstream with Mike Huckabee raising money for it. Mitt Romney saying he's all for it, all for declaring every zygote a person. So on the one side, you have this modern American conservative juggernaut. And on the other side, on the side that does not want the government controlling every pregnancy in Mississippi and making abortion illegal and outlawing fertility treatment and turning birth control into a crime, on that side, it's a very different type of movement. Yes, they do have support from national groups like the ACLU and Planned Parenthood, but on the ground in Mississippi, they are very much on their own. If you're against this personhood amendment in Mississippi, you'd better be ready to paint your own sign and go stand by it on a big college football Saturday to get your message out. If you are against this radical amendment in Mississippi, you make your own sign to go on your own car. You make your own signs and you show up with your neighbors at the county courthouse. Anyone who's willing to say we've got to save the pill in Mississippi, you make your own signs. And while you're at it, you spray paint your own hat. And along the way, you get organized enough to pull your money together, maybe try to buy a few billboards like this one, which says eggs are not people. And another that says personhood makes birth control a lethal weapon. Kind of scary. The campaign against Mississippi's personhood amendment is kind of a do-it-yourself affair, DIY. It is very, very, very grassroots. It is a few friends deciding that since there are no commercials against the personhood amendment, they'll make one on their own at home. You can do a lot with your own personal story and a few posters these days. You can tell the world that under a personhood amendment, you might have died from dangerous pregnancy because the treatment to save your life would be made illegal by the personhood amendment. A miscarriage might mean you would get investigated by the government for harming what the state considers to be a person. You might not have gotten the birth control you used to make sure you did not have a baby until you were ready to start a family. In the middle of these stories, in this very homemade ad that you just saw there, there is one story that's shocking in the sense that even amid all of these other sort of moving and very interesting stories, it stops you cold. It's the story told by a woman named Kristen Hemmons. Kristen Hemmons was abducted and raped and then shot twice by two teenagers 20 years ago this week. Kristen Hemmons has emerged as a leading advocate against this radical amendment in her home state of Mississippi. She was one of the plaintiffs in the suit that tried to keep this personhood amendment off the ballot in the state. That lawsuit was not successful. Now that the amendment is on the ballot, Kristen Hemmons has become a leading voice against it, not just because she is good at conveying the message against this thing, which she is, but it's in part because her personal story is so compelling and she is willing to tell it as part of making that case.
I was just a normal Mississippi girl going to college, and then I was abducted and raped. It changed everything. Initiative 26 doesn't make any exceptions for rape or incest. It goes too far. It would be so bad for women and families. I don't trust the government. I trust Mississippi families and women to make these important decisions. It's perfectly acceptable to be pro-life and against Initiative 26.
As you can see in the sort of arc of those different materials we just showed you, you can see that the campaign to stop this very, very radical personhood amendment in Mississippi is getting more organized. They are getting slightly more polished, but it's still very DIY, frankly. And they haven't got much time to stop this radical amendment. Mississippi's going to be voting on this very soon, very soon. They'll be voting on this on November 8th. Joining us now is Kristen Hemmons of Oxford, Mississippi. Kristen, thank you very much for being with us. I've been looking forward to the chance to talk with you.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Rachel.
The personhood amendment does have its roots in some pretty radical politics, but it is being marketed in a way to make it seem more mainstream. You've been talking to people about this and campaigning against it. How would you explain to somebody like who sees himself as very mainstream, somebody like Mitt Romney, who says he supports this because he's anti-abortion, how would you explain the implications of this measure?
Well, a lot of Mississippians are very conservative, as most people know. The vast majority of them say they're pro-life. So, I have to talk to Mississippians every day who are like Mitt Romney. And the way I talk about it is